Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Hi everyone and welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast. Thanks very much for tuning in. This is being recorded in early July. The mayfly have pretty much largely gone. I'm still seeing a few left on the river at the moment, but not many. The hatches for me on my home river are really more the caddis. There's plenty of caddis around, and of course midges. It's been a disappointing session. We'd had a little lift on my home river, the Tor, and I've really tried hard to swing some flies from salmon. Had no joys there. We don't get a lot of fish, but even when I'm doing that, I'm usually hoping that there might be a sea trout in the system somewhere, and you get those little plucks on the end of your fly and you think, okay, they're around. And we've not seen so many signs of those, and generally across the river there as well, things have been pretty quiet. So it's been really, really interesting to see, and I hope that things do sort themselves out. But I've been really enjoying the fishing. This podcast is going to be a little bit different. The podcast I recorded with Nick, where we answered some listener questions, went down really, really well. And I was really pleasantly surprised to hear people contact me and send me loads of questions. So I thought, for a little bit of a change, and I'm always trying to do some things a little bit differently as well. So I thought, well, I'm going solo on this one, and I thought I'd answer some of these questions. And my wish, or my hope really, is that people find them interesting and the answers of value. So I'm going to kick off with the very, very first one. It says, Pete, loving the podcast. Here's a question. I'm convinced I miss fish that are rising because of drag. I mend the line, but it can cause disturbance when I do so. Do you have any tips? And that's from Steve in Wiltshire. Steve, thanks very much. I'm really pleased you're enjoying these podcasts. The way I think about it, when I make a cast, and I guess we're talking obviously in a river situation here and an upstream presentation, the way I think about it is that when I make that cast, I always feel drag is going to be an issue somewhere within that drift of the fly. So when I send that line out, that's in my mind. It may be I reach the line upstream while the line's in the air, so I reach my rod across and upstream, and that will place a portion of line upstream for me and overcome drag as well. So that may be something I do. If I really have a strong feeling that's going to come into play somewhere along the lines, then I'll be putting that in almost automatically. What I'll also do there is with mending the line as well, and you said that there was disturbance on the water there. And one of the little tips I've always tried to give people is that when you put that mend, when the line's actually on the water, what I'll do is shoot line into that mend as well. And you'll find that puts some slack into the line, but it won't disturb the fly when it's actually on the water. It's a hard one to actually describe, but hopefully that makes it pretty clear. I'm actually pantomiming doing it now. So I put that mend into the line, and when I'm doing that, I release some line into that. And it was interesting, my friend Perry I was fishing with the other night, I was trying a different rod or a new rod, and he videoed it. And it was interesting watching how I also automatically put slack into the drift of the fly, almost subconsciously, I guess. So I'm thinking about that the whole time. But hopefully that little tip helps. And then what I also do as well to help that drift a little bit longer is to sort of jump the rod tip up a little bit while I'm holding it in my hand and shoot line into that, and that puts a little bit more slack into it. And if you're allowed to do so on our streams in Devon, we can. There'll be some times where I'm looking at a downstream presentation, and that's a way that I can make that fly travel down without any drag as well. There are situations as well when I want a little bit of drag, and when I've mentioned at the introduction that there's caddis on the water, and sometimes a little bit of movement there can make the fish hit the fly and make that little bit of difference. But yeah, what I'll do is look up and think about the reach cast first of all. So I make my delivery cast, reach the line upstream. That's usually the situation where I want that to do. There may be situations where I need to make it downstream as well, but generally I'll make that reach upstream. And then if I'm mending the line, I shoot line into it. So that causes that disturbance. overcomes that disturbance. So that makes life a whole lot easier for us as well. So hopefully, Steve, that has helped a little bit wherever you're fishing, and will be of use to you. Hi Pete, I remember you wrote a piece for another publication on daytime sea trout fishing, but can't find it. Can you remind me? Dave from Ivybridge. That was a piece I wrote for Trout and Salmon a little while back now, 3, 4, 6 years ago, probably something like that. And I really love trying to target sea trout during the day. And probably the most productive times are if you've got a river just starting to come up or a river starting to come down. But I like targeting them all the time, and I like to target them in situations, normal fishing situations. And I think probably one of the things you need to know is whether the fish are in or not. And like I said again in the introduction, I'm not seeing a lot of sea trout around at the moment. But if I am going to target them, I like to try and catch them on a dry fly. I'll probably put on a slightly bigger dry fly. What I'm looking for are shaded, deeper pools, and I'll cast upstream to them. I'll let the fly drift down naturally the first time, and then the second time I will probably give it a few twitches. The key to this, though, is cover the water, because I found, experience has taught me that if I'm looking for them during daytime, and I mean even in bright sunlight as well, I'll target them then, but as long as there's those shaded areas. But what I'm really looking for is that immediate take from the fish. I find the more I cover the water, the less likely it's going to be, and it usually happens first or second drift. If I have no joys, then I'll move on to there. And it can be an interesting time when mayflies are around as well, and twitching a little mayfly, upstream presentation, because they are a wary, spooky fish, as we well know, but I like to try and creep up on them, so I prefer to do that, and it can be really productive. I'll be honest, I've not caught one so far this year, but there haven't been many around, but I really, really enjoy doing it. So I think that's part of it. If the river is coming up or dropping, I'll probably fish a streamer. That tends to be my go-to for that, and I'll fish an intermediate line as well, and something and work it through the water. Depending on the pace of water, I'll work it through the water there. And also, if the river's dropping down, it's a bit too big for me to fish a dry fly to, then I will more likely fish Euronymph techniques. But generally, I like and find it's really good fun to try and catch them on dry flies. It's kind of cool to try and do it as well. So hopefully that is of help. But I think the biggest thing is knowing your river, knowing where the fish will hold, and so important knowing that they're actually in as well. So that's what I would be thinking about if I'm going for those. So I hope that is of use to you, Dave. Local as well, so I don't know if you're fishing rivers like the Plym or the or some of the streams down on the south side of the moor there, but I know on my home river, the Tor, that it doesn't run crystal clear, and I'm convinced that probably is one of the reasons it makes life a little bit easier for me and allows me to sneak up on those sea trout during the day, but hopefully that is of use to you. My next question is from Simon in London. Pete, you seem like a well-travelled angler. I'm extremely lucky that I've been around. When things are clear to do so, I'd really like to try bonefish. Where would you recommend? I'll be back in touch for tackle advice soon. That's Simon in London. I would probably, there's a couple of things actually. If it's your first time, first off, there's a couple of things we can talk about before that actually. And even before we touch on the actual tackle, I'm not going to talk about that now, but get yourself some decent sunglasses. That'll be one of the first things that I do, so that you're able to see the fish. There's nothing worse than standing in the front of a flats boat and the guide shouting at a fish that is, at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, wherever it is, and you can't see it. So invest in some decent sunglasses, and possibly if you don't double haul, learn how to do it as well. You could either go and see an instructor. There's so many good instructors around. I would go and consider that, so that you're in good shape, or look on YouTube as well, and you can learn to double haul via many videos there, and that has you really, really well prepared. As a beginner, really, you want to be able to go somewhere where you can catch some fish, and probably, in my humble opinion, I'd look at somewhere like Mexico and Ascension Bay and head down that neck of the woods. I don't know if you're planning on going with friends, self-guided, or in a group. if it's first time, a group trip can be really, really good fun because you get to meet some like-minded people. The evenings can be fun as well. And everything's organised for you as well. I've done both, and I like both as well. But I think for a first time, that can be a nice way to do it. If it's on a family holiday, I've even been to places in the Caribbean where I've been able to go fish the flats at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and then come back and make breakfast with the family. And that worked really, really well. That was down in Tobago, actually. And I'd had shots, permit. I didn't get a permit there. I caught bonefish and tarpon before anyone else had got up. So that was a really, really cool thing to do. But I would think if it is your first one, if you're thinking of going on your own, see if you can join one of these group things. There's the great travel agents who put these trips together that you don't have to worry about anything. So everything's taken care of, and particularly getting down to Ascension Bay can be a little bit bumpy on the road there. So I think Mexico is probably a great place to start it. And if you do go down that route, bonefish are a truly awesome fish, and I think you'll be hooked. Literally, I think you'll absolutely love it. Okay, so from bonefish, we're going back to the river. This is a email from Ian. Pete, firstly, thanks for the magazine. I'm really enjoying it. I seem to struggle to get CDC to continually float. Am I doing something wrong, or do I give up? I remember the really early days of CDC, and we didn't have really anything that we could treat the fly with. You'd try putting gink on it, no matter how subtle you were with it, and it seemed to make it sink immediately. And I remember in those days it was really, really difficult in testing, and I didn't really get what it was about. But latterly we've been really lucky. And the way, if I'm fishing CDC, even as a fishing guide, I could keep the fly floating nice and high and nice and dry as well. And what I would tend to do when I'm first getting it out of the box, I'll use something like TMCO Dry Fly Magic. I'll put some of that on and just leave that as is and fish that for a little bit. And then if I'm lucky enough to catch a fish, I'd get a desiccant of some sort. One of those powder desiccants. They will dry it really, really well. The cheaper option as well is kitchen cloth as well. You can use that, a kitchen towel, sorry. Kitchen towel will do a great job, will dry the fibres really, really quickly as well, and you're back fishing again. And then I spend time, I find when I'm fishing CDC, and again it's only personal experience, but when that fly's sitting a little bit lower, I don't tend to have as much success. I know that's situation dependent and of a hatch and everything else, but I found that the success I've had has been far superior if the fly's sitting nice and high. With desiccants, be really, really careful where you're standing. I don't think they're great for your health if it gets into your lungs and stuff. So I always make sure I apply it downstream so that it's not blowing back and I'm breathing it in. But it's great stuff and works really, really well. So that's what I would do. And just keep an eye on the fly, see how it's looking, making sure it's sitting nice and high in the water. And I think if you do that, you're going to be in really, really good shape. Now, I found from a time point of view as well, it's so much quicker as well. And, from emergers, for example, from a fly point of view, and I know a lot of people use the Clink Hammer Special, which is an outstanding fly. My life's too short to tie loads of them up. So I've switched emerger-wise, and I think pretty much I'm exclusively fishing. I think it's Paul Proctor's pattern, the pearl butt emerger, and it's tied in a shuttlecock style with the feathers, the CDC feathers pointing upwards, pearl butt on the butt as it suggests, and a little bit of scruffy dubbing. And I have those in size 14, 16 and 18. And they seem to work really, really well for me. So they're really quick to tie. It doesn't matter if you lose them in the tree, and they're really, really effective. And I think you could probably play with those flies a little bit more rather than having the pearl butt. You could tie a shuck on there of Antron, and change the colour of the butt sometimes as well. But I think you can play around with those a little bit, and it's been a really good fly. I've caught most of the nice fish I've been lucky enough to catch this year on them. So that would be my humble opinion, and stick with the CDC. Tiemco Dry Magic isn't cheap, but it does last a really, really long time. So you'll probably let out a sharp intake of breath when you see the price, but it does last a really long time, and it's really, really good stuff as well. So we're going from the trout stream now to Patrick in Lisbon. Dear Pete, you mentioned Skagit lines in a podcast recently. Do you use them much? The answer to that is when I need to. I've always had them from the very start, the very clunky early Skagit lines, and I was playing with switch rods as well very early on, and we couldn't really figure out what they were, and subsequently now we kind of know they're really more of a short double-hander. But I was sort of playing with those very, very early on. Couldn't really figure out what best to do with them, but subsequently, with the amount of tips that you can put on, I like to use them early season or in big water, and I can add a mow tip with, that will get me down, and they're nice and easy to cast as well. And it, having been lucky enough to do some steelhead fishing and using them out there, it really made me fall back in love with them. And even from a fly perspective as well, I found fishing steelhead patterns like intruders a great fly, and that's what I pretty much exclusively fish in bigger water or very early season now. And I've mentioned on other podcasts that I'll fish those, and then I'll fish traditional spay patterns, really, and that's the extent of what I'm using. But the Skagit lines, I think there's a place for them in your armoury if you need to throw some heavy stuff, if you need to get down deeper. They're definitely the way forward, and I think they're definitely worth having. They're great, nice and easy to cast, and designed to chuck heavy metal as well. So I think they make a lot of sense if you can get hold of one. Staying on the salmon theme, Pete, I listened to your recent podcast with Danny Morey. Why is it the single spay you like? Why is it the single spay you like so much? Many thanks, Sheena. I just love it. I come from an instructing background as well. I'm a casting geek, and I think technically it's a tough cast to execute consistently. Landing your anchor, your line in the correct place consistently takes some doing, and it's a real pleasure to see skilled spay casters in action. And I've been lucky to see many of them, but I just think it's a really beautiful cast, and I really enjoy it. There are times I've had a bad shoulder, and if I try and single spay for any period of time, it's still a little bit sore for me, so I go back to the more, you can see I'm probably being influenced by steelheading quite a lot, but I'll go to the circle spay or snap T casts because they put a little less, I don't need to make such big movements there, but the cast for me is the single spay, that is just absolutely beautiful. And I practice it all the time, and I like fishing it when I can, when it's not too painful. But I think it's a great one to have, and just such a beautiful cast, and to be able to see really great spay casters execute those casts is nothing but a pleasure. So yes, I enjoy those. We're going back to the trout stream. Hi Pete, you have referred to a mast hatch a couple of times. What do you mean by it? Cheers, Richard. A mast hatch, this is, any guides out there will know this one. It's a favourite of mine that what I mean by a mast hatch is that you think you're spotting, let's use mayflies as an example, that you think there's a hatch of mayflies, you think the fish are eating the mayflies, you tie on your mayfly, you cast your fly to the fish that you think's nailed on, and you think that you're going to catch it. You don't. You change to another mayfly pattern, cast that out, and the fish doesn't take it, and you kind of scratch your head a little bit and think things through. And it may be that you suddenly realise that it's not the mayfly that they're actually eating. They're eating something else. It might be a terrestrial. Quite often it can be midges. And you think, I remember guiding some people and I was convinced, there was an olive hatch and this was it. We were going to get into some fish, and it didn't happen. It was only that I watched really, really carefully and saw that they were actually eating midges and not the olives. And there's a real good lesson in there, really, I guess, that by watching what's happening on the water and spending some time watching what's happening pays big dividends in the long run as well. So I've even learned, I get so excited still fishing and want to go down to the river and cast a line and see if I can catch a fish. But I've found that I'm spending more and more time now just sitting and observing stuff for a little bit longer, just a little bit of patience, get myself into position, wait for any bow waves if I've waded into stiller water, let those settle down a little bit, and then from there I'll consider what's happening, and I want to see that fish rise more than once rather than fire. And I'm guilty, as many of us, that we really love what we're doing, but sometimes you see that fish rise and you think, right, okay, I'm going to fire at it straight away. But sometimes it's worth waiting just a little bit longer and seeing if you can work out what they're eating and if you can see what they're eating, and that will pay dividends for you in the long run. But the key thing is getting out there and enjoying it, but observing will pay you big dividends. So I hope that helps a little bit. Pete, I listened to a tackle talk recently. I guess that's the one I did with Nick a little while back, and considering a new rod for river fishing, but can't decide whether to go for a 3 or a 4 weight. Advice, Dean. Well, Dean, it's a nice problem to have. It depends really what sort of fishing that you're going to be doing. If you are predominantly fishing a dry fly, I would be looking to probably go for the 3 weight route. I'd even probably, and it's pretty easy again, going back a little while, buying light line rods was a little bit more difficult, but it's a lot more easier than it was a little while ago. And I'd probably even consider a 2 weight actually, if that's just what you're going to fish. What I like about the 4 weight though is that it will give you options. So the way I think about it is, and let's compare a 2 weight and a 4 weight, and the 4 weight line has a little bit more mass in it. So if I was going to fire a dry drop or a clink and dink, whatever, duo, whatever we want to call it, that greater mass will be better at propelling that heavier weight to its target. So that's how I would look at it. My gut generally is that I tend to have a dry fly rod and a duo rod, but these days I can barely fishing a duo setup. I'm waiting for those fish. I'm not really motivated by numbers of fish, and I'm just looking for that riser and seeing if I can catch that rising fish. They say that you do enter a different phase of your fishing, and I really can feel that I'm in that right now, so it does seem a little bit different. So that's where I would go. If I was just going to fish a dry fly, I'd probably look for a 3 weight, possibly even a 2. And if I were thinking of, I might want it for a duo setup, or just throwing actually an upstream nymph or a downstream nymph or whatever you want to do with it, then that may give you just that tiny bit more flexibility as well. So that may be worth thinking about, but I hope that's some advice for you. Pete, I still get the odd wind knot when I'm fishing. Help! Keep up the podcast, Johnny. All right, Johnny, well, hopefully I can help a little bit there. Let's explain what causes those. Wind knots, as we all know, is really a misdemeanor. It's not really what they are. I'd rather call them, as many instructors do, casting knots more than anything else. It can be caused by many things. The way that I try and think about it and try and explain, even though I was teaching beginners to cast, I would deliberately get them to cast a tailing loop. What is a tailing loop? Well, if we imagine the path of the rod tip moving, we could move it really straight, and if we move it really straight, we get a really nice, or as straight as we can, we get a really nice tight casting loop, and that's really useful for still water situations, casting into the wind, and also for me as a river angler really, that tight loop allows me to judge where I'm trying to land if I'm force casting. If I've got that nice tight loop, I can see where that fly's going. And a lot of the casts that I'm making are going in under trees, and I need to be super accurate. If I'm throwing a big wide loop, then I'm going to be in trouble, and probably my accuracy is going to suffer a little bit, and I'm probably going to land. I'm going to put a lot of metal in the trees, which I obviously don't want to do. If we think of what a convex path of the rod tip is, imagine a windscreen wiper moving. That's a convex path, and that will throw that big open loop, and that's often associated with beginners when they're bending their wrist a little bit too much, and they'll be throwing a great big open loop. There are situations where we want to actually move and widen our loop just a little bit. There are situations where we actually want to do that. It might be if we're throwing a team of flies that we might want to widen that out. So if we just have a little bit more rotation in there, that's going to widen that loop out. But the wind knot comes from us going in a concave path, and the rod tip dips a little bit, and that's going to cause those wind knots in there potentially. And that's often an uneven application of power, and you might see it from somebody on a lake trying to cast a little bit further, and they're putting that speed in a little bit too soon, making the rod tip dip a little bit, and it comes up and the line follows it. And that's where we actually get those wind knots from. One of the ways to overcome it and to practice casting is a really good way to improve your casting as well. And instead of, it doesn't say whether you're a still water angler or a river angler, but practice your casting a little bit. And what I'll do is look at the things I just mentioned, really, that I'll take my rod and line out. I won't throw lots of line off of the reel. I'll keep it short and really manageable. And then what I'm going to do is tilt it on the side and just watch what I'm doing. And I watch my back cast, my forward cast, and then I make sure I'm letting the line extend behind me on the back cast. I'm watching it extend in front of me. I'm seeing how smooth I am. I'm seeing how that loop looks. So they're irregular movements in the loop, or does the loop of line as it goes out, does that look nice and smooth as well? So I'm looking for all those sorts of things as well. And then I'm looking just to see how that loop looks. And then I'll play with things a little bit. I'll widen the loop out a little bit. So I'll use a little bit of wrist rotation to widen that out. But I'll play with starting that cast smoothly and coming into a faster, more abrupt stop. And that's what I'm playing with. And even myself, who's held a fly rod most days, I'll still practice that and just watch everything. And it's a really good way to get a handle on your casting. And then, of course, you can move the rod up. So if you're side casting it, so you're watching everything, and then I move the rod up into the overhead position and cast it from there, and I'm keeping all those principles the same, and I'm thinking about that lovely straight line path of the rod tip. And then I might even take that a little bit further, and then I'll take that over to the other side of me. And so I'll cast across my shoulder. I might cast off my other shoulder, or I might camp the rod over a little bit so that it's over my head, but the line's travelling down the left side of me. I'm a right-handed caster. And I'll play with that a little bit more. And then sometimes what I'll do is put the rod in my left hand as well. And what that allows me to do is cover all sorts of fishing situations. So if I can use all those angles and all those planes, then there's nowhere I can't get my fly to. So I can always find the easy cast to cover a fish in a particular situation. And it's really interesting. I was just thinking when I said about that, about the left hand, when I was teaching people, it's really interesting because if they never picked up a fly rod before, say they're right hand dominant, the interesting thing was that there is no muscle memory. So you can teach them right-handed and then say, right, pick it up left-handed. And it was really, really surprising to see how many people who had not picked up a fly rod could cast both right-handed and left-handed. It's a really interesting exercise. And teaching yourself, if you're a right-handed caster, to cast left-handed makes a world of difference because you can see all the faults. The muscle memory isn't there. So you can teach yourself, and that transfers back to your right hand, and it allows you to be able, or your dominant hand, it allows you to spot those issues much more quickly because they'll be amplified in your non-dominant hand. You'll see that you're hitting the rod a little bit too hard, you're not being as smooth, you're not letting the line extend behind you or in front of you. So you can watch everything. It's a really, really good way of diagnosing it. And then I take, as I said, that session over to overhead position, and I'm just watching everything, taking my time, and then moving the rod over to my other side as well. And it's a really good warm-up cast as well, and to get a real sense of being able to cover the water. So that will enable you in many situations to suddenly open up the water and cover fish that you may not have been able to cover because you thought it was too difficult. So there's lots of things you can do, and I think we'd never stop learning about casting and looking to improve. And I think if you've consistently got a rod in your hand, then it becomes more natural to you as well, and it becomes a lot more easier. And I find that not long sessions are needed. So 10-15 minutes of nice casts, that will be enough. That gets the muscle memory engaged and everything looking good. And that also helps when you get to the river as well, because you're in the right mindset. You know you're casting well. And I think this is a missed thing in fishing, that the mental state of how you get there. And if you're casting really well, you know that that's not going to be an issue. You see a fish rise early on, you know you're in pretty good shape, and you know you can cover that fish. And I think that aspect of it as well is kind of interesting. And we used to work a lot with that with beginners when we'd had them out on the river for the first time, and you'd see if they were getting a little bit tense, and we'd stop things for a bit. And because you're learning something new and you want to impress your teacher or instructor as it is that you become a little bit tense. So it's being able to spot those things, and even self-analysis on that front can make life a little bit easier as well. So I would think about those little practices and see if they're of any use to you as well. Right, we are going on to tackle for a bit now. It's an interesting one. This one is from Phil. He says, where do you stand on waders? Buy cheap or expensive and hope they last? Really interesting one. I've done both. I live in waders, and I have a few pairs that I run all the time, and I found that I will have a salmon pair that I use just for salmon fishing, and I have a pair that I just use for trout fishing as well. And the other thing I've noticed is that when I get out of waders, I'm a little bit tough on them, and I stretch the elastic on the shoulder elastic when I'm taking them off, and I found over time that can fail before the waders actually do. So I actually unbutton them now, and I've noticed a real difference. I'm running, as I said, a few pairs at the moment. I really like the Vision Koski waders, and they're sort of mid-range, and the Patagonia Swift Currents as well are expensive. They are really comfortable, really, really good, durable. They've got knee pads in them, which is fantastic as well. One of the spots that I fish in, I have to get under an electric fence, and I've nearly electrocuted myself about 10 times now, but that makes it a little bit comfortable in my creaky old knees as well. And it's one of those really difficult ones that waders are, there's something that are going to go in time, and it's a tough one to bite the bullet. I think if you're fishing a lot, you can probably justify more expensive waders or mid to expensive ones. If you're not fishing very often, then cheaper ones are probably going to last you absolutely fine. I do prefer stocking foot waders because I like wading boots, and I find them more comfortable to walk in, and some of them are so light now that they're really, really comfortable. I also like studs in as well. The streams I fish in Devon are and can be a little bit slippery at times, and I would much prefer to be safe than anything else. There may be arguments that the sound of the metal crunching on stones could potentially frighten the fish of your lifetime away. But I would rather be safe. So that's what I tend to use there. But it's a really interesting one to think about. And it's a difficult one to answer as well, because we know they're going to fail eventually. So, do you get some that are going to last you a short period of time, or pay more for more expensive ones that in theory should last you a lot longer as well? But I'm pretty happy with the choices that I've made, and I'm enjoying wearing them, and they seem to be holding up really, really well. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with those at the moment. This is an interesting one from Don. I'm really considering learning to be a guide. Where would you suggest I start? I've talked about this on other podcasts in the past as well, and I love helping and advising people in their guiding setting up, and I've hopefully helped lots of people along the way and will continue to do so. The first most important question, though, is, and I always say it, and I've said it previously before, if you are sitting there thinking you're with a guest and you are thinking, there's a big fish rising there, I wish I was catching that, or they're getting stuck in the tree and you're getting irritated, walk away now, don't do it. I don't think the qualification for being a fishing guide is being a good angler. I think it's communication. A fishing guide instructor is in the service industry. I think some don't realise that at times it's not about the guide and their prowess. It's about making sure their customer has a really, really good day and a memorable and enjoyable one. When I've been hiring guides, and I think we talked about this in the podcast, the last one with Danny, that I look for their ability to get on with people, to put people at ease. They obviously know they're fishing, but a lot of the other things I can help and advise with as well, or that's what I would used to try and do. But that's what I would look at first. To enter it, there's a couple of things you can do. It's an interesting marketplace to be in. It's a difficult one. It's a lifestyle job more than anything else. You may have a guide in their area that you could try contacting and saying, I'm considering it. Would it be okay if you have a group of people, if I could try and help you, and get a sense of it there? There are a lot of great schemes getting children involved in fishing. There are casting for recovery. There are lots of schemes. You need, if obviously with children, you would need a CRB check as well. You can go on the basic coaching schemes and learn to become a fishing coach. That could be a good way to do it. But yeah, that's where I would probably go with that. And I would think, right, okay, what do you actually want out of it as well? Is it something that you want to make into a job? Is it something you want to earn some spare cash from? There are people out there earning a living from it, and it's not an easy one, as I said a few seconds ago. It's really not an easy one. But I would look at that. I would think, and I've had many people who said, right, I want to do a casting qualification, come and see me. And they said, well, I've been doing it like this for years. I said, yes, but you won't pass the exam casting like that. You need to show technical proficiency. And I think often as well, people feel that casting instructors aren't really fishermen. But, I know many that are just outstanding anglers, and some of the best that I've actually met. And being able to cast really well, funnily enough, enables you to cover the fish really well as well. So it may be that you consider further down the line a casting qualification, find a mentor, find a local instructor who will be able to give you an honest review of your casting and say, well, this needs work on, and you can consider those aspects of it as well. And some guides like to just guide people on the water, some like to do a bit of everything. We used to do a bit of everything, and it may be that we taught beginners, so that would be part of the process. But one of the important things I found was at the start of the day was asking our clients what they wanted from the day, not going through what we were going to do. I'd ask them what they wanted from the day, and I found that was a really good way to understand what my role would be during that day. Did they want some casting help? Did they want me to point out bugs? Did they want me? So all of those sorts of things are really, really worth considering. It's hugely enjoyable. I'm so proud of how many people I've managed to bring into fly fishing who are hugely passionate about it. It's deeply rewarding. It's great fun. It is not glamorous. That's one of the things I will say. It's incredibly hard work. But if you're prepared to go down that route, I'm wish you the very, very best. Okay, Pete Love the podcast. Fluoro or copolymer? What do you prefer? From Leo. As I get older, I'm getting greener. And fluorocarbon does have its advantages. The main reason I personally don't use it, it's only my personal view, is that it is not biodegradable. And if I'm getting caught in a tree, if I'm losing flies, that's going to stay around. That's going to stay around for a long, long time. That is the main reason I will use copolymer. I think my favourite, copolymer would be, that's the route I would go all day, every day. It means should you want to, and I don't use degreaser at all, but should you want to do that, you can control whether you want to float or sink your tippet as well that way. There are arguments, of course, for fluorocarbon, that it is stronger and thinner, so you can go up heavier breaking strains, but my pure reason for not liking it is simply because it's not biodegradable, and it's as simple as that. As I get older, as I said, I get a little bit greener. This will be an interesting one. From Brian, I've been told furled leaders will help my presentation on the river. Have you used them? The answer to that, I'm going to get myself into a little bit of trouble because I've got friends who make furled leaders. So there are, there's demand for them out there. I'll come back to the presentation part first of all. Presentation to me is more a function of how I'm casting and how I'm presenting that fly. And will a leader dramatically improve my presentation? No. I can tailor a leader to how I want it, be it a furl leader or a copolymer one. I can tie a leader to do exactly what I want it to do. So if I want something to turn over something heavy, I can have a relatively thick with a short tip on the end that will turn the flies over. Or if I want a delicate dry fly presentation, I can have a longer taper of thinner material towards the fly there. So I can mix things up. So will a furled leader do that? Well, I suppose to a degree it will do a similar sort of thing. But the thing that's always put me off them, and it's only personal view, and there are so many people who use them and swear by them, and a lot of it is about confidence as well. And if you put that furled leader on, or whatever it is on there, and you fish better, go for it. That's what I would say about it. For me, though, the reason I didn't, it just felt like an extension of my fly line with a shorter tippet on. So it didn't kind of make sense to me. I'd rather go for a knotless tapered leader. But like I say, if you feel that's going to help your presentation, if it's going to help your turnover, if you fish, more importantly, more confidently with it, go for it. There are no rules. So, the fish don't care. So if you think you will fish better with one of those, go for it. As I said, I've got friends. I'm probably going to get a kicking after this if they've listened to this. So fingers crossed. But if you feel you want to go for it, go for it. If you think it will work, and try it. They're not expensive, so you can try it. And there's these little cottage industry guys making these things. If that's what you want to do, go for it. So please do. They're not personally for me. And I had a friend who made them, was almost going to give me one and said, yes, I remember you don't like those, and put it back in his pocket again. So that's where I am on those ones. I'm a keen angler and have recently got a puppy. I see you take your dog fishing. Are there many places where this is possible? And was it difficult to train him on the water? There aren't. I think it's just a case of checking where you're fishing and seeing if you can take a dog. There's lots of places you can't. I'm lucky where we take our dog that I can. I've got a couple of places as well where the Fox and Hounds, there's some beats where I used to guide there that I could take the dog as well. There was an interesting story when he was very young. It was my birthday and my daughter and wife came to the river with me. It was beat 2, so if anyone's listening who knows that beat will know it. And he was a young puppy. I put down my New Sage X to tie on a fly, and my puppy picked up the rod and ran off with it, got caught in it and snapped the tip section and then the second section as well. That was quite an interesting birthday. And we got that sorted out. That's the great thing with rod warranty, is that it was one of those the dog broke my rod type stories. But that was kind of an interesting one. But he has been a constant. Monty, or Montana's his name, but we call him Monty, has been a constant companion on the river. He has been fantastic, and if anyone looks at my social media, you'll see he's out with me most of the time, and fishing with me. He's just fabulous company, and we were really lucky that from a very early age, and I think it's with many aspects of getting a dog, it's the training. For me, I don't want a dog that you have got to stake to the ground. That's not a fishing dog to me. My dog comes with me. It's sometimes he might cost me a fish. Not now, I've noticed, and he's just 4, and I was fishing the other day with a friend of mine, and he'll wade. We were trout fishing. He'll wade next to us, and he's fantastic. He knows part of catching a fish is why we're there, or as he sees it, that's the exciting part of it. And he'll wade with us, or if it gets a bit deep, he'll go onto the bank, and then if we hook a fish, he'll come and have a look. He doesn't go after the fish. He doesn't get in the way. There were some interesting moments early on where he didn't want to retrieve the fish or anything. He just wanted to have a look and see what was going on, and understood. I suppose it is the retriever in him coming out, but he didn't retrieve anything. Nowadays, he will just come have a look. I make sure I show him the fish. Doesn't do anything to it, and he's more excited when he sees it dart off again. When we fish for salmon, he will step down the pool with us, and even it's really funny, even when we get to the bottom of a run, when you wind he may be one of the pools we fish is a little bit deep for him at the tail to wander down with us, so he'll come halfway down the pool and then get out and watch, and you can see a little face watching as we wind in, which is really cool to see. He's so into it. We taught him from a very early age. We took him to the river. His first trip out was to the river tour, and we sort of trained him early on not to go into the river, which with a Labrador can be incredibly difficult. But he wasn't. He was never any trouble, and he gets what we're doing when we're fishing. He doesn't run off upstream. He doesn't get super excited, doesn't jump in the river or anything, so I'm extremely lucky. But I guess him being immersed into it and being used to being fishing, he knows exactly what it is. But it's just been one of the best things and most enjoyable things, and I can look at him and say, come on, let's go fishing, and he'll come along. And the other day, actually, I wasn't going to take him. I thought he was knackered from the day's fishing previously and wasn't going to take him, and I went out to the car, opened the door, and this little face came along again, and he jumped in and came with me, which was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed that. So I hope it doesn't say what dog you have got, but they are just great company, and I'm really, really lucky to have Monty. He's great company. We love him being there with us fishing, so it's great. So we're on to the last one. Pete, I find my hookup on fish with dries could be better. Any advice? Many thanks, Jim. It depends. It's really, I think as anglers, often we blame ourselves for missing fish. I notice early on in the season that fish miss the fly a little bit. They take a bit of time to get warmed up to hitting a dry fly as well. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and I was saying, the fishing, where I'd had really confident taking fish, and I'd been catching some really nice trout, and I'd been really, really pleased with them. And it was a little bit of a disappointment. I just was I was just lifting into them, and it wasn't happening in quite the same way. And actually, it happened to me yesterday as well, and I'd seen a really nice fish move, got into position because I was standing at the head of one pool, fishing up into the tail of the other, and I needed to get into that next pool, which I did. That overcame the drag. I was putting the slack in, but it wasn't enough. And cast, the fish took, and I lifted into it and felt nothing there. And it was really interesting. I don't know if it was a sizable fish and it coming up just moved the fly away. It was interesting how they took it. If I feel, though, that I'm not hitting fish, I might change the pattern and how it's actually fishing. So if I'm fishing on top, let's say we're fishing an elk hair caddis, and I guess we're talking in a river from Jim's question, I might switch to one of those pearl butt emergers or a clink hammer or deer hair emerger, whatever that might be, that sits the hook just that little deeper in the water. And I find if I'm missing fish, that can be a better way of doing it and making contact with those fish. So that may be worth trying. And I've mentioned about the pearl butt merger earlier here, and hopefully if you haven't got them already, it might inspire you to tie a few up. But I find if I change how that hook's sitting, that can sometimes overcome it. I do have our fish in Devon particularly they're sort of all or nothing, and it is harder when you're fishing the water to non-rising fish. If you are just fishing the water, you don't know where that fish is going to come from. And I think sometimes as well, you're probably fishing to a fish that isn't naturally feeding. It's opportunistically taking the fly. And so it's using momentum to travel to hit the fly. And so sometimes they explode on the fly. They may miss it. They may be... And like I say, coming back again, it's not always us. I guess it's the guide in me as well. That is protecting the person fishing a little bit. But I think there are situations, some of our fish will come up out of the water and down onto the fly, and good luck with trying to hit those at times. And it's even times where I'm watching a fish sip, I cover it and the take to the fly is completely different. And that's a really interesting one as well. And whether that's the same fish or it's another fish has seen that fly has decided it's going to barge in on the action, and that has caused that different take for the one that was quite happily sipping. So it's really interesting, and our little feisty fish sometimes can be difficult to set on. And when I was guiding, I would say to people, look, don't take it personally if you miss fish. You will miss some. It is just the way that they're actually taking. And that's one of the nice things on the occasions I get to fish a chalk stream, that you can watch everything happen. But that comes back again to what I was saying about watching the fish and waiting for those rising fish. If you've got a fish on a steady pattern, it's probably more likely to take that fly a little bit more confidently than one that's come out of nowhere, that you're surprised when it hits, and the fish is as well. So, it may be another argument for waiting just a little bit and seeing if there are fish moving. It can pay dividends, as I've said earlier, and that might be an easier way. But I think one of the things as well is change how the hook's sitting in the water, and that can sometimes bail you out and give you a little bit of confidence. One of the other things I think about is timing as well. If I'm missing a few, if I think I'm going too fast, I try really hard to slow things down and lift into the fish rather than strike in. There will be situations where I have to strike the fish, and I think about when I'm fishing on Dartmoor. And the fish are incredibly quick there, and you can't really lift into those. You've got to hit them pretty quickly. Yet the ones I've been, like I said earlier, have been catching further down on my home river, have been sipping flies quite happily. And it's interesting right now, as I said, it's been different right now. The way fish have been eating the flies, there's been good hatches of caddis on the water, but they're not really rising as confidently as they were, and the water was a little bit lower. It was hot days. I was catching fish in hot days, covering shaded areas and waiting for those fish to rise. I don't know if the river, because it was low, the fish were a little bit more corralled into a position. I don't know. And where we've had some bigger water, that they've spread out a little bit again, and it'll be really interesting to see. And the weather temperatures up and down all over the place at the moment, so it's really worth experimenting. And like I say, I think watching will pay you big dividends. So I hope, Jim, that is some small help to you. Well, that's all the questions answered. I've managed to rabbit on for nearly an hour now. I hope, even if you haven't sent these, that these have given some information that may help you with your casting, your fishing, in some small way. Thanks very much for listening to this one. I've really enjoyed doing this one. It's lovely chatting to people, but it's lovely chatting about something that you're passionate about. Please send me more questions if you'd like me to answer some of those. It may be I grab another guest along for these, and we do another one. Send me the questions. Thank you again for everyone who told me they're enjoying the podcast and the magazine as well. It seems though that's going incredibly well, so thank you for that. And yes, I'm if you've any questions, fire them across to me, and I'm really, really happy to help. But this is Pete Tigers signing off, and this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thanks so much for listening.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.